Hey folks, it's Rob Flux with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking all about interior designing and how you can actually use that to get the best bang for your buck for the sale of your finished project. And in order to help us have this conversation today, we've got Nicola Barett from Instant Interior Studio to tell us all about the interior design process. Welcome aboard, Nicola.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's good to be here.
That's okay. Now, interior design is one of those things where it's a incredibly important part of the process, but for a lot of people, they leave it to the very, very end. And it's kind of like an afterthought after the design's done, after the development application's lodged, and after the approval's in, and then we go, right, how do we make this thing look pretty, right? And yet it's probably something that we should be bringing a lot earlier into the process. We're going to dive deeply into that. But firstly, before we go down that rabbit hole, tell us, who is Nicola? What's your experience? Who's Instant Interior Design Studio and the like?
So yeah, I trained as an interior designer. I've got an honours degree in interior design. It's a 4-year degree. And I've worked in the lighting space as well. So I have some lighting qualifications, and I've done a heap of renovations. I've done over 10 for-profit deals with joint venture partners. And I've specialized in interior design for developers because I really like this space. I like the commercial aspect of it. And as well as doing my own deals, I'm also working with developers and for-profit renovators, doing interior design services for them.
And a regular at our Sydney meetups as well.
Yes,
So,
I am.
I guess fantastic to have someone who's not just working in the industry, but actually doing deals themselves. So you're seeing both sides of the equation. You kind of understand, I guess, the pain points that the developers are going through, as well
I've
as
done many feasibilities in my time.
Well, I keep telling people only 90% of them don't work, right? But it's the 10% that do that make it worthwhile. That's the whole joy of this. So I touched on this before in that interior design is kind of the last point in the process. But why don't you just firstly give us a little bit of a definition? What is interior design? Because I think there's a lot of myths and misunderstandings of what interior designing is.
So interior designers specialize in exactly that, the design of interior spaces. So we're not like architects looking at where to put a building on a site. We're looking at interiors and how rooms relate to each other, circulation, and we're experts in interior finishes rather than exterior finishes like an architect. So interior finishes are things like your joinery finishes for kitchens or tiles, tapware. So that's our area of expertise, and we follow a design process. So it's a 7-step process that's taught, not just at the university I went to, but the same design process is taught at design universities or schools around the world. So we have followed quite an analytical approach to design rather than just sort of guessing what color white to paint walls. We've actually got some theory that we're following in order to make those decisions and help our clients.
Yeah. So you spoke about I guess the interior finishes, but it's also the use cases of the building. So how is it actually going to be used in a functional sense, and making sure that it's efficient and effective at its intended purpose? Because as developers, we say we want a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-garage kind of thing, and we'll get a design back. And sometimes those things, when you walk through them, you go, man, this just doesn't feel right. Whereas others just flow so beautifully. You're kind of in that space where you kind of make, how does it flow? How do the interfaces between one area and the next area work?
Yeah, well, before I'm even thinking about choosing tiles or tapware or anything like that, I want to make sure that the user experience is fantastic. So whoever's going to be living in that space and buying those dwellings, they're going to enjoy using and living in their home. And like, what does that practically mean? Well, things like, you might not have an entry that opens directly into a living space or a kitchen. You might want to have some sort of a vestibule so that the journey and transition through the spaces, feels good. And there's a space where the homeowner can greet their guests. And then we might have different zones. So that living, kitchen, public space is going to be in a different zone to the bedrooms and the bathrooms, which are more private areas for a family or whoever's living in that space. The other sort of things you might think about are views. So what's the view from the front door? What's the view every time you walk into a room? What are the views to a bathroom, because no one wants to see a toilet when they're sitting at the dining table. So that sort of thing is something we're focusing on all the time and trying to rationalize space. So I always say that 160 square meter well-designed dwelling is going to be better than a less resolved 180 square meters. And that translates to dollar value. So build costs are quite high. So for every square meter that's not well resolved or a bit of a waste of space or not really well thought out, so at two and a half thousand a square meter build cost, I'm just approximating, I know it's different around the country. Every square meter that's wasted is wasting money that could be better, spent elsewhere or be put in the developer's pocket.
Yeah. So now, from an engagement perspective, we touched on this a couple of seconds ago, that interior designers are typically engaged after the design is done.
Yeah.
Right. So whether it be an architect, whether it be a building designer, a draftee, or something, but a floor plan is done, and often a development application is lodged, and the plans come back, and at that point, whilst there's a lot of value that you can add, it's nowhere near as much value as if you're engaged right at the very, very start. So
yeah, get a bunch of interior designers started on this topic, and we would love. I think that's why I like talking to, being in this sort of forum, because hopefully I can change the perceptions around what an interior designer can offer. Because you're right, I think. From a lot of people's point of view, an interior designer is someone that might come in at the end and choose some carpet and paint color, but we can offer so much more than that.
I think it really comes down to people's perception of the different roles that I guess draftsmen, building designers, architects, and yourselves, the different roles that you all play. And I guess whilst there's crossover in a lot of areas, I guess there's very, very distinct roles that each play. So if we start with, I guess, a kind of a high level, just a drafty, right? I would pick them as someone that you have a very specific outcome. You've already got it in your mind, and they're the ones that are going to draw it up. Like, it's pretty much, and I'm going to be very simplistic here, but it's not quite monkey see, monkey do. But it's, I've got a very specific outcome. Just make that.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I used a draft person to do a development for a project I did in Geelong, and they were fantastic at dealing with council and knew all the setbacks and all the intricacies that I wouldn't have known for that particular area. I live in Sydney, so I bought in that area because I knew it was going to be a profitable deal. But and they knew that the project was going to have 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and a kitchen space, and then 1 carport, and they designed well for council for my brief in that regard.
Yeah. So,
and they got the project through council in 3 months. It was fantastic.
yeah. So that's a drafty, and then a building designer kind of takes that up a notch, and they're dealing a lot more with councils, and they're a lot more familiar with the issues and challenges, and they're going to take that to, I guess, a lot more.
They might have a bit more finesse. Yeah.
A lot more finesse in trying to actually get that through.
Yeah.
Then you've got, I guess, an architect. Now, an architect spends a lot more years at university. They've got a lot more, I guess, scope for I guess their services, and sometimes their scope can include interior design, and sometimes it doesn't. And so
Yeah.
it's understanding, I guess, the distinction between the two. But what does an architect do that, say, a building designer doesn't do?
So they, well, for example, an architect can design a 50-story building, and a building designer is not going. So an architect is trained in all different types of the building of all different types of projects. So the building designer is probably going to be more in that residential space and design for buildability, because their clients want projects to be built quickly. A developer wants something that's going to be able to construct quickly without, having to wait for long lead times on products.
Whereas an architect might use more bespoke, I guess, kind of finishes and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. They're trying to get a particular look and feel out of the
Yeah.
outcome, but
And
they're
there's some fantastic products that are being released all the time from manufacturers and material creators, and so architects are probably quicker on the uptake with that sort of thing, and using perhaps what we might be considered more experimental products with a different outcome.
yeah, but they're looking at, I guess, in a lot more intricate detail, things like how the buildings are actually placed on the site with regards to their orientation and things like that. They're looking at, I guess, the external materials of the
Yeah.
building as well, whereas an interior designer is looking more at the
Yeah.
internal and the flow of the business of the design. But architects often can study the interior side of things, but they don't necessarily always apply that. So it really comes down to the scope of that. So we've got opportunities to have the architect do the interior design, but we've also got opportunities for, I guess, a specialist interior design to also come in and add to the process. Whether they go through the architect or whether they come through somebody like yourself, it's the purpose of the interior designer is to really understand the flow of the building, understand how spaces interact with each other, how materials, the usability of the building. So it's very easy to say, "Hey, it's 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom," but how usable is that? Do I have to go through a big Z shape to actually get to a particular room, or does it flow really nicely, or how do areas interact with each other or not? That's really the purpose of the interior designer. So,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, you're going to say something?
Oh, I was going to say, yeah. So when designers and architects are designing, we start off with bubble diagrams. So a floor plan doesn't necessarily look like a floor plan. It might look like bubbles on a page, and then we start to resolve that. And from the client's brief, that um, bubble diagram then starts to morph into something that has dimensions and really can be built, but it starts conceptually, and where we're taking into account the zoning, the circulation. We might also um, try to include furniture in our initial drawings as well once they've got dimensions. And it's not to say, well, this is the sort of bed that the client needs to buy, or this is the sort of sofa they need to buy. It's really just to understand, well, how is the furniture going to be placed in a room? Because, say, a bedroom could be 4.5 by 4.5 square meters and have great circulation with regards to where the door is, the joinery is, and an ensuite is. Or it could be 4.5 meters by 6 meters, so a lot larger. But if the room's not well organized with regards to the bed placement, the joinery, and the bathroom, then the traffic around that room could be quite convoluted and really not a good use of space. So we're not saying that bigger is better. We're trying to resolve spaces so that they're great and usable and work well for the people that are going to live there.
Yeah, and that what you're saying, the trafficable side of things, I tend to call that the workflow. So
Yeah.
as you're trying to do a task, what is that task? So if you're trying to get out of the car and take your groceries to the kitchen, what's the flow of getting that, I guess, from one place to the other? If you're trying to get all the laundry from, I guess, the bathroom down to, I guess, the dirty linen down to the laundry, what's the flow of that? Then you've got to take that outside. So there's all these little workflows that kind of happen in a house on a day-to-day basis that we don't really think about, but they are part of the the use of the building. If they're not designed right,
Mm.
then a building feels, I guess, claustrophobic or doesn't feel like it's a nice flow to it.
Mm. Well, I think people notice when something's not right, but then, of course, when it is right, it feels good, and so they're probably not going to pick up on that. But it's definitely that jarring word that you're using that's spot on, because people are going to pick up when something, it takes them a really long time to walk from, say, their garage to their kitchen. And in design, it's ideal, I know it's hard, not always easy to achieve, to have a circulation loop. So when we're passing through spaces, we're not backtracking too much and we don't have too many dead ends. So if we can design in a loop, that can be a great way to plan um, a dwelling and to plan circulation. And we're not then doubling up on circulation space.
So give us an example of something that's designed in a loop, and then something that might be the contrary to that, which would be something in a
Mm,
linear fashion, just so we can
okay.
understand how to imagine that as a good flow.
What about think about a kitchen. So if you've got a kitchen with one point of entry compared to 2 points of entry, that's going to change the circulation quite dramatically. Even having a kitchen with 3 points of entry is going to have better circulation. But with 1 point of entry, you've got that backtracking that I was talking about. So if you've got multiple people in a kitchen, that's going to be clunkier than if you've got 2 points of entry into a kitchen. It's going to be a bit smoother in terms of circulation.
Yeah, so things like an island bench where you can come in on
Mm,
both sides of the island bench into the kitchen, as opposed to a galley kitchen so that those kinds of things are kind of where you talk about. Now, sometimes we don't have choices because we're
mm,
constrained by what's physically possible on the site, but where we can, we want to identify that early and go, well, maybe we can compromise in a different area that isn't as important as the kitchen and won't have the day-to-day impact on somebody's life,
mm.
and kind of push that down the road to a different part of the house.
Yeah, yeah, it's not always achievable. I mean, these are all nice to have, but and I think build planning is and uh, doing building designs is often about compromise. We have our wish list, and our non-negotiables are at the top, but there's often compromises. Like every I'd say that every project is going to have compromises. So it's just trying to solve as many of those constraints as possible.
Yeah. Now, you touched on before that I guess interior designers don't just pick the colors and the stones and that sort of thing, but you actually offer a complete end-to-end service with regards to the entirety of the interior design. So things like cabinetry, electrical plans, lighting diagrams, finishes schedules, a whole bunch more. What are the kinds of things that, like, if we go through them one at a time, what are the things that we might think about from a cabinetry perspective, for example?
Okay, so in terms of the documentation that we produce, like, um,
Well, no, some of the things that you're thinking about when you're coming up with a cabinetry design.
oh, so I mean, I'm thinking about the circulation within a kitchen, um, but what I'd recommend for your members is to potentially have standard size cabinetry if possible. It's great to be able to do a bespoke kitchen, but if there's budget overrun, then you've always got a fallback to be able to get flat pack kitchen. So that can be a risk mitigation tool to request in your original, your original brief when you're giving that to a designer, so that you can, just risk mitigate a bit. And a lot of kitchen designs can be um, designed to those flat pack dimensions.
So when people talk about that, and we'll just kind of break it down into its small components. A kitchen, when you think about it, is actually a set of components, and the baseline component is what is called a carcass. Okay, so the carcass is the shell that the kitchen is kind of bolted around, and you then
Yep.
put your surfaces on the top, and then you put your doors on the front of it. But the carcass is really the white box that sits underneath with the shelves. Okay, so if we're using standard dimension carcasses, that's what Nicola was talking about here with regards to, these things are typically 600 mil wide. So if we're doing 600 by 600 and another 600, and we know we've designed our space, then if we get into a bind and if we have to do an IKEA kitchen, we can, right? But equally, if we want to do a high-end kitchen as well, we can also do that, and we can get much in the same space. You can get a very different look and feel for the same design element.
It's about thinking about that up front and planning for those dimensions. And I would say to do that for things like vanities as well. Vanities come in standard sizes, 600, 750, 900, 1200, etc. So when the bathroom is being designed by maybe even by an architect or a draftsperson or the building designer, request that vanities are standard sizes. Shower screens are another thing that can be standard sizes too, especially those fixed shower screens. But there are some shower screen companies that offer shower screens with hinge doors that also come in standard sizes. So that might be an option as well, just to helps reduce those quite expensive costs in wet areas where they can be quite a big bit of the budget.
I would go so far as to say, and this is part of a different topic and not relevant today, but wherever we can, standardize on sizing on everything, folks. If you have the opportunity to make a custom bespoke design, then that's going to be the opportunity for you to spend some very, very large money. But if you're always using off-the-shelf componentry, so what is called a kit of parts, so you can actually get any manufacturer to use the same size, dimensions, and that sort of thing, you can then do a budgety version or an expensive version and still fit it in the same space. So subject to your budget, that same design could work in multiple demographics, so to speak. So try to keep it as standard as you can. No custom bespoke windows and no custom bespoke anything, folks. Keep back to standards and your life is going to be so much easier. That said, you don't stop at cabinetry. You do electrical designs and lighting designs. And you mentioned that you've studied lighting, and I'm looking at you well lit here, and you're looking way better than me, Nicola. So I've got some decent lighting.
It's all
here.
lighting.
Sorry, it's all lighting. So the importance of lighting, people, I think they massively underestimate the power of lighting. We go, we're just going to put some downlights everywhere. And yet you can get some amazing outcomes for relatively cheap and actually massively change the look and feel of a house.
Yeah, so lighting design, I think people can get daunted by lighting design because it appears techie and more technical, but there's a way to break it down into just three types of lighting design. So one is general lighting. So is the space adequately lit for purpose? So a kitchen with its general lighting is going to require a different lux level, which is just the measurement to, say, a hallway. And then two, you think about task lighting. So is the kitchen bench well lit? is a desk well lit? So that's some examples of task lighting. And then the third type of lighting that you want to think about is accent lighting. And this is like the prettier stuff where we might have a beautiful material that we're using in our building and we want to highlight that. And the great thing about this is that you can combine it. So you could, for example, in a hallway, have a downlight that's strategically placed that is going to light a piece of artwork in a hallway. And then it's not actually about the light that's producing the light. The light's going to bounce off the artwork and highlight that. So sometimes it's just thinking laterally and combining all of those different types of lighting. And you don't need to spend a lot of money to do that. It's, it can just be by strategically placing some downlights, or maybe even incorporating some wall lighting into your designs as well, and trying to do that early, thinking about like what are the features of the design of the dwelling and highlighting those, and then just using the reflected light of those to light a space. So I quite like beacon lighting. They're a fairly inexpensive supplier, and you can do some clever things with the types of lights that they provide. And they've also got great showrooms, and they're sold all around Australia.
Yeah, and we don't have any discounts with Beacon
Oh
Lighting
yeah,
folks,
sorry.
but yeah, that's okay. But they've just got a whole bunch of business from us. That's amazing. Uh, what I was going to say, the simplest of things, and it's really amazing. If you do a downlight that is flush, then when you walk into a room, when you look up, you actually have a bright light that actually goes into your
Mm.
face. If you have a downlight that's recessed just that far into the ceiling space, when you look up, you don't get that bright light in your face, but it reflects or it pushes down all over the ground. So the light just lights up the room and you don't even see it.
Yeah, so that frosted element is becoming the light source,
Yeah.
basically. And also what's happening now is that downlights are they're they're sort of out, like,
Yeah.
not that they're not in trend
Uplights now.
anymore. Yeah, so it's about having cleaner ceilings. So the latest thing is about the fifth wall. So the fifth wall is the ceiling, and designers in high-end projects are putting wallpaper on ceilings, gloss on ceilings. They're doing all pretty fancy things to ceilings.
I've not seen that before, but what you were going exactly where
Yeah.
I was as well, which is uplighting. So having the light on the wall pushing the light up and reflecting off of
Mm,
the ceiling, and so when you look up, there is no glare, and the room is
mm.
just lit, and you don't even see where the lighting's coming from.
Yeah.
It just kind of blends in.
It's
Um,
a really nice quality of light to live with, and it makes us all look better too. Because it's
I need
wall
that.
lighting is more flattering than down lighting, which creates shadows. So in a bathroom, you particularly, if you've got the budget to have wall lights above vanities, uh, yeah, I would recommend that if there's the budget to do that. And the other thing I would recommend around lighting is, again, to have a floor plan, because lighting can be lighting is determined usually by where the furniture is going to go. So your placement of your sofa, you might want to have a couple of lights above the sofa. But if you don't have a floor plan or a furniture plan to show where the furniture is going to be, you don't know where to put your downlights. So, and the same in bedrooms as well.
Yeah, or the last thing you want to do if you want to be sitting on the couch and reading, you don't want to be sitting there in the dark, right? So,
Or
uh,
have the light behind you.
yeah.
Like, create shadows.
Now, you mentioned, I guess prior to us coming on air, a thing called a reflected ceiling plan. What is a reflected ceiling plan?
So a reflected ceiling plan is, it's, imagine a floor plan, but then you flip it upside down and you're looking at the ceiling. So it's recording everything that you would see on a ceiling plan. And reflected ceiling plans are used when designers possibly are doing more, so might be putting in some fancy features on a ceiling, like a coffered ceiling or some sort of decorative element, but it doesn't have to be. The reflected ceiling plan also just is recording, say, the position of any lights, position of any vents, anything that is going to be on that plane is put into a reflected ceiling plan.
Yeah,
And
and then
interior designers, architects, and yeah, building designers produce reflected ceiling plans.
yeah, and then I guess you also do, I guess, what is more traditionally associated with interior design, which is the finishes schedule, which is, I guess, everything that you can basically install into the house in some way, shape, or form.
Mm.
So whether it be tiles, whether it be flooring, whether it be taps, whether it be sinks. So what's the power of the finishes schedule?
So it's a comprehensive document. Like you said, it's like the shopping list for the builder. And if you have that up front, it means that the builder can give you a more accurate fixed price quote, because and with less variations, because it's quite clear as to which tile is going to be used, which tap's going to be used. Like those items have a description, the supplier details, a link to the actual website. So it's very clear and upfront as to what the builder needs to price and what's going into the project.
Yeah, and uh, that is probably the misconception where a lot of people think the interior designer's work starts and finishes is just that finishes schedule and trying to get the colors of everything actually looking good. But that's really the polish on the end. It's really everything else is the base that the polish is actually applied to, and that's the polish at the end. And if you don't have a good base, then it's like polishing a turd, right? So if you so you need to get the whole thing right. You can't just
Yeah.
go, hey, I want to put some finishes in there and it's going to look great. But you've got to go, my cabinetry's got to be good, my flow's got to be good, the
Mm.
lighting's got to be good, the whole lot works together, and then the finishes just brings it together. And by bringing it together, you kind of, it just blends and flows and just feels right.
Yeah, so in an ideal world, interior designers would be involved before the DA is approved. And I know that that doesn't always happen, but yeah, so I do have people coming to me asking about finishes, and then I have sometimes feedback on a floor plan, because I think getting that floor plan at a 1 to 100 scale, which is a very high level scale, it's not got a lot of detail, but that 1 to 100 scale, that is what would go into council for a CDC or DA. Getting that right and getting that flowing well is, to me, the probably the one of the key things that I think is kind of really important, because it means that the user and the person who's going to live in that dwelling is going to have a good experience of living there because it works well. So that's a fundamental to try to get right, if with all the constraints that we have to think about, and then think about the finishes after that.
And where you can get an opportunity to, I guess, putting all of that together with the floor plan and the furniture package and the cabinetry and all that sort of thing, if you can get all of that, and then there's a number of organizations that project the plans from the ceiling down onto the floor and actually make it life size. So there's a company called Life Size. There's another company called Big Plans.
Mm.
So these places are all the way around the country, but basically you can actually physically walk through it and go, hey, it doesn't feel right. But it's actually at a 1 to 1 scale, right?
Yeah, I mean, if
Um,
sounds amazing to be able to go and do that. I think, if you get the opportunity and you've got the budget to be able to, then by all means, do that, because that will eventuate in getting that 1 to 100 floor plan right. But there's other ways of approaching it too. So, and it is hard to quantify, but if you feel like something's a little bit jarring about the floor plan, there are architects and interior designers that offer floor plan reviews for a minimal amount, like not the full service amount. So they might be able to iron out some of those issues if you feel it's not quite right. And the other thing I would recommend people do if they want to be in the development space for a while is learn to read floor plans as much as possible. Like, I know that people have a lot of, they've got a lot of things to think about and a lot of things um, to consider when they're doing developments. But if you're going to open homes, look at the floor plan first. Then when you go to the open home, walk through those spaces in your mind and then reflect on it afterwards and try to marry up what you imagined and what's actually there. So you're training your brain to read floor plans. It's going to be really helpful for you as you progresses and grow your business as a developer, a property developer.
Yeah, and when you're trying to imagine yourself before you get to site, imagine yourself going through all the typical use cases that you would use a house for. So when I get up from the couch and go to the fridge, get myself a beer, and then go back, sit down, how hard is that? When I get up in the middle of the night and want to go to the bathroom, how hard is that? When I want to, I guess, take the laundry from upstairs in the bathroom down to the actual laundry itself, how hard is that? Go through all those flows and go, right, how many things am I bumping into? How many times am I turning? What are the things that how hard is it to actually navigate this house? Right? Do I think that there's going to be physical obstacles in my way? I can give you an example. The house I stay in Sydney, when I'm staying in Sydney, to get out of the bed, I have to turn left, turn right, turn left again, and then I'm in the toilet, which is the ensuite, right? That's actually attached to the bedroom, right? So when I look at that workflow, I go, that's not a
You're
good
fully
design.
awake by then, aren't you?
You try and do that in the middle of the night. That is hard work, right? So
Yeah.
so you're gonna have to do that by braille. But it's that kind of workflow that you go, right, what am I thinking about? And that's how you're going to train yourself on those floor plans, folks, is just kind of put yourself in those imaginary situations. And there's only so many different things you can do. Groceries from the car to the fridge and or to the pantry, those sorts of things. There's probably 10 odd flows. And if you map all of them out, you go, right, how hard is this house to use?
Yeah, and the advantage of like rationalizing that circulation space is that it's cheaper to build. So if you've got 5 square meters of circulation space where you're turning left, turning right, and all of that sort of thing, that's build cost that you might not need to have. So by mapping all of that out and trying to rationalize it and reduce it with the use of a furniture plan and your zoning, then you can also save money in your build costs too.
Absolutely. That's less walls that you need to build when you're navigating from the bedroom to the bathroom.
Yeah, yeah.
So what are some of the other, like, in trying to train ourselves to read the floor plans? What are some of the things that other than the workflow that I kind of spoke about, what are some of the things that we want to be looking for that kind of identify a good design versus a bad design?
I think integration of joinery too. So sometimes joinery can be an afterthought. Like most dwellings need to have a linen cupboard, and people do value storage. Also in kitchens, make sure that what's been allowed for is tall cabinets like the fridge and the pantry. So you've got, your regular bench space, but also allow for a bank of tall cabinets too. And of course, that's then there's, the joinery in the bathroom as well. Make sure that there's adequate space for at least that 600 size vanity.
What about, I guess, you mentioned before, I guess the zonings. So as you go from a private space to a public space and
Mm.
that sort of thing. So, what do your bedrooms, when you walk out of your bedroom door, what are you walking into? So are you walking into the middle of the lounge room? Are
Yeah.
you walking out directly outside? What
Yeah.
those little things probably have a huge space as
Yeah,
well.
so it's keeping those areas in different zones, so relatively separate. So you're not opening from a bedroom onto a living space. So there's transfer of noise when that happens. Also, looking into bathrooms, obviously, just a pet hate of mine to be looking into a toilet. So those areas, if they're separated from the public areas, you're going to have a much better, living experience. And now there is this move towards, they're calling it broken plan rather than open plan. So zoning even of those public spaces as more people work from home. So you might have also, a couple of different generations living in a home. How can all those, people with different needs out of a space all live together? So I know open plan's still a thing, but it's actually starting to morph into broken plan. And I was listening to, there's a James Hardy futures, uh, I don't know, a forecast on the other day. And some of the panel talked about this as well, and talked about the journey through the home, rather than everything just being completely open. So I think that that's going to become something for the future too.
Yeah, agreed. So, just trying to think of any other. The other things I'd be looking for is the empty and wasted spaces. So, dead ends that go nowhere, that are just dust collectors and things like that. Is every space in the home actually used? So, how are you using the number of times I've seen? I guess a bank of stairs, and underneath it is just dead space that can't be used. There's lots of things like that. What are the common ones that you see that are dead spaces?
Yeah, understairs is a good example, because understairs you could put a powder room and you can put a laundry. Um, yeah, a corridor that just doesn't really go anywhere. So, you know, um, or a space where, yeah, it's nothing's there, but it could have been turned into a desk area or a cupboard or storage. So it's actually being utilized. But it's better to probably just to try to resolve that completely, so that either you're making the dwelling smaller or you're absorbing that dead space into other rooms, or rejigging, how you plan a bathroom so that bathrooms and cupboards on the other side of the wall can, uh, you know, puzzle together to make a better use of space. So that just takes a bit of time by the designer in, um, you know, working through and mapping out different ways of, organizing the space. Because when it's lines on a paper, a couple of hours of trying to resolve that dead space, when it's lines on a paper, it doesn't really, it's not going to cost anything. But once you're on site and that's dwellings being built, and someone's walking around and suddenly you sort of realize that this space is clunky or it's not really working, it's often impossible or very expensive to change those walls. So
Yeah.
resolving on paper, and spending that extra bit of time to nut out those areas or circulation zones or dead spaces that aren't really working or don't go anywhere or that meander a bit too long, is is vital.
Yeah. So, now, I guess we touched on before the fixtures and finishes, and the fact that that's the shopping list for the builder. A lot of the times when we go to the builder, they go, "Well, so what level of finish do you want?" We've got a builder's range. It's bronze, silver, and gold. What would you like? They tend to be at a price point that not necessarily as I guess cohesive in how they actually come together, and they don't necessarily have a feel or a vibe that they actually bring to the
Mm,
house. They're nice, but when you walk into the space, it's like there's something missing. But with
yeah.
a good fixtures and finishing finish, it's very cohesive, and it just
Mm,
flows and it fits, and it feels good.
yeah.
What are some tips and tricks that you could say for people to say, how do you get just that bit right, just the finishing off of it?
Well, designers, as part of our design process, usually always come up with a concept. And when I say concept, some people talk about it being a mood board or a design narrative, but it's the creative direction for the project. And it's it's such a simple thing. And I think anyone in the community, a lot of people do like this sort of thing. So you can come up with a concept yourself. You don't need a designer to do that. And a concept could be even one beautiful image that describes the look and feel of how you want your project to be. Sometimes it could just be a couple of colors. I often put it into a bucket of like Hamptons or a Mediterranean style, and then filter all my decisions through that. And it's that filtering is how you could approach the builder's range. So rather than going in and looking at the builder's range as just a massive different options, try to choose things in context. So come up with your concept first. So if your project is in the country, you might have a different concept to say whether or not it's on the coast. So on the coast, you might have a Mediterranean or a Hamptons concept. And then when you're going to choose those finishes, even though they're, the builder's range and they're not super fancy, you're actually choosing them through a filter of a concept with a bit of a design direction and creative direction in mind. And then those finishes are going to have some cohesion and come together as a look.
Yeah. So, and for people who are out there that are like me, and I have trouble drawing stickmen, and my creative flair is not. I think it's non-existent. I think I didn't evolve that from caveman's days. But you have some concept designs that you have available to people where they can actually download that from your website. That gives them, I guess, the fixtures, the finishes, those sorts of things as a starting point. It might not be exactly perfect for their site, but it's going to give them a heck of a lot of that. Give them some insights into what that product and service is that you offer.
Yeah, so I've been looking at ways to make design more accessible because it does tend to be this higher end service. It's a per hour sort of a consultancy type of work, but I think it's so vital even for an entry level project, let alone something that it's at the higher end. So I've created finishes schedules in different themes. So I've got a Mediterranean finishes schedule, Hamptons, warm neutrals. There's um, like a modern Hamptons and a traditional Hamptons. So I'm creating schedules in themes, and they are like a shopping list. And on those schedules, there's a carpet, floorboards, paint colors, and joinery finishes. I won't go through all of them, but there's pages and pages of items, actual codes, and links to suppliers with the suppliers' details that someone can use to first get their project costed by a builder quite accurately because it's quite clear as to what the finishes are. It creates a cohesive look because it's in a style. And coming back to that style, I keep them fairly simple. So concepts they don't need to be complicated. I think simple is good for, especially in our world. And yeah, something that is just going to be universally appealing to and appeal to a lot of people. So they're basically digital finishes schedules. They're instantly downloadable from my website, and I do have a free one. If someone doesn't really know, well, what does that mean? What does that actually look like? I've got a free schedule. It's like a starter schedule. It's not as comprehensive as my other schedules that they can download and have a look at. And it's a schedule that finishes that I've used in a project myself, and they can get an idea of what that actually looks like and what that list is.
Yeah, very good. And for anyone out there who's an annual member of ours, and so is a regular coming to our meetups as an annual member, Nicola is one of our discount suppliers. And so if you go to our members only portal, you're going to get an exclusive discount for grabbing some of those schedules and services off of her. I think it's a 25% discount. Is that right, Nicola? So
that's correct. Yes.
So if you whilst I'm not trying to say don't go directly to Nicola, if you are an annual member and you come through our door, then there'll be a discount code that you can actually apply. Now, if you don't know that about our meetups and those sorts of things, and you say, what is this annual membership? Well, that is to actually come to our meetups. We run these meetups all the way around the country. We run them physically in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and we're about to launch in Perth this month, Nicola. So I don't know if you want to come on our winery tour as we go over there.
Sounds fantastic.
So not only do we run them live, but we also live stream them all the way around the country. So no matter where you are, they're always great to have. Nicola, thank you very much for your time today. It's been amazing in actually having you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate your sharing that. Hopefully you get plenty of business out of people coming and grabbing your finishing schedules. But in the meantime, folks, I hope to see you at one of our upcoming meetups. Till then, bye for now. Bye.